traps have got a lot of negativity in recent years. I've spoken on traps before, and today I wanted to take a look at an option for possibly adding some depth to your traps that may seem counterintuitive, especially when we're hearing a lot about trying to get rid of traps, which I think is a total bogus move. Traps are fun. They don't have to suck, and they're not a cheat. But what I'm going to suggest today is based on something one of my gaming group, somebody in my gaming group told me, and that's layering traps. Now that may seem, like I said, counterintuitive. You're trying to make traps not suck and not seem like such a dick move. Layering more onto your trap seems like it would just make it worse, right? It doesn't have to. When we're talking about layering traps, we're usually talking about making them more interesting. It's one thing to be walking down the hallway, have the floor drop out from under you, and take 2d6 damage for falling. It's another thing to be walking down a hallway and to have the floor fall out from under you, make your save, only to realize that the ledge that you have managed to get a hold of is now slowly tipping towards you with the clatter of little feet as you look up and find a bunch of scarab beetles coming out of little holes that are in the walls. That lock that you just picked may have made a fizzle and a little puff of smoke, leaving you wonder what you narrowly missed or what possible insidious effect it may have had on you, only to run into, when you open the door, there's now a scythe trap that slides down and gets you. It was a false trap, or and again, that may seem kind of like a jerky thing, but it makes the traps a little bit more interesting. And that's just the basics. I mean, really, we're talking about things that can have lead-ins. It may seem a little Rube Goldberg, but I mean, you could have, I tripped the trap, a heavy ball starts rolling towards me, and I find that I'm easily able to escape it by dropping down into the groove at the bottom of the floor, only to find out that when the ball hits the other end of the hallway, it hits a trigger which opens up a sluice gate, which now is letting the green slime pour down what I now find is a gutter right towards me. These things will add depth. They'll make the traps more interesting. They're still going to potentially damage the party, but you'll notice in this case, for example, in this last example, the ball didn't hurt the player. It was a menace. It was something that could have potentially hurt him, but there was a relatively easy way for him to escape it. And the slime is pouring down, forcing him to move, forcing him to act. You're actually doing very much with traps in a lot of cases what wizards and spellcasting monsters are doing. They're using their magics to force movement, to control the battlefield. Now, layering of traps, that's where it kind of dovetails into another form of layering traps. Traps can be layered with encounters. The example with the ball and the green slime, that's sort of an encounter because it releases a slime or an ooze, which may get out of the trough and start attacking. But what if the initial trap was a really loud, lightweight, explosive rocket trap, comes out with a whistle and a scream, explodes, creates a puff of smoke, obscuring vision, maybe making it hard to cough, maybe causing itching, maybe it's full of itching powder, and so the party is now at disadvantage because they're just so itchy, or they have to make a save versus intelligence to resist the itchiness, only to find out that the whistle was an alarm to alert the bugbears that live in this dungeon that the sanctuary of whoever their boss is has been breached, and now they need to come running. That is an alarm trap with a slightly less. It's a non-lethal trap that leaves the players disadvantaged for the upcoming combat. There's one trap that I had used in a game way back, but I'd used a trap where the party came in and they triggered the trap, but it didn't seem to do anything immediately. It sprayed them with kind of a foul-smelling fluid, but it wasn't flammable. It wasn't causing any immediate damage. It wasn't poisoning them. It wasn't dissolving them. It wasn't acid. And it just was all over them, and it was sticky. They really didn't have time to disrobe, get all their equipment off, and undo it. They just continued on. What they didn't realize, well, until further down the adventure, is they had this stuff all over them. They exited the dungeon, and they started to make the next leap for the adventure, which was traveling through some wilderness. Then they started getting attacked by owlbears. One owlbear, another owlbear, two owlbears, just owlbears coming from all over the place. And they couldn't figure out why the owlbears were attacking them. They figured that they must be minions, or maybe they were some sort of shape-shifted creature. Maybe it was the same owlbear. If they didn't kill it, it got away. Maybe it was a recurring attack. What they didn't realize was that the oily, greasy crap that they got sprayed with was owlbear pheromones. It was the scent of an owlbear that was attracting other owlbears, and so those owlbears were now tracking the party based on scent. It's a trap. It's not a trap that's immediately lethal. It's a trap that makes the players wonder and could have really informed their actions. In this case, it didn't control their actions. It didn't force them to do anything, but it could have. Depending on the nature of your party, that party may have become really frightened, really concerned, really paranoid, and insisted on taking a long rest right there in the dungeon so they could get out of their armor and they could scrub it clean and deodorize it or disinfect it. Maybe they were worried about some sort of long-term poison. Even if it doesn't have the eventual payout, which is that owlbears start coming out of the woodwork, literally, it could be that now they're half naked, sudsed up with travel soap, and then some other dungeon monster comes. That is a good opportunity as a DM to just throw in some oh shit factor. They're not prepared. They're out of their armor. Their armor class is down. They're vulnerable. And even though they might be doing it on rotation, where they have different players are disrobed at different times, they're not all going to be at full strength. The wizard may not have his components nearby, so there might be at least one or two turns while the goblins from further off in the dungeon come skittering up and attack them. But your trap is still paid off. We're talking about layering in not just in multiple effects, but layering in the story elements of a trap. Your trap. Imagine if you, for example, that you had a trap that was triggered at the beginning of the dungeon, and it didn't seem to do anything. Well, what the party doesn't realize is that a mechanism has been set off in the walls that is going to create change down the road. Had they succeeded in detecting and disabling that trap, the adventure would be very different than what they're about to go through because they triggered it. Maybe the trap makers, the trap setters for whatever temple or fortress or thieves guild or whatever that they're invading, were smart enough to realize that they don't necessarily want every trap in their dungeon armed all the time, full time, if they can avoid it. And so they've got mechanisms, magical or mechanical, or even maybe a bell rings and the kobold minions get off their stools and put out their smokes and go to work. But whatever the case may be, is this alarm tells the other traps when to activate, whether it's a magical signal or it's minions or an actual mechanism. So if they succeed in disabling it, well, maybe down the road they'll still have to go through those individual traps, but we don't know. It could be that the trap is that certain doorways that are open by default suddenly close. So the passages are different, or maybe hallways shift. Maybe it starts up some sort of mechanism, setting a countdown. You really want to get your players worrying when they trip that trap. Describe to them that all they hear is a hollow clicking, a distant clattering, and a bit of a flywheel effect. And then place a die 12 on the table with the 12 upright. And every hour of game time, or every so many turns, tick it down by 1. They'll catch on real quick that they set something in motion. They don't know what it is. They don't know how it's going to affect them. But it's not, haha, you failed, take 3d6 damage. It's, haha, you failed, there's story in play. That counter could be a self-destruct mechanism. Maybe if that counter gets down to 0, before they find the way to shut it off, a gate opens up and the lava that's below this dwarven hold is allowed to flood the vault, thereby denying the ancient treasure of their ancient dwarven lords who have been entombed there to anybody. It'll just be eaten up by the earth, where, you know, from whence it came, and what is more fitting for, you know, for a dwarf. They lived in the earth, now they will rest forever in the earth with their treasure, but those pesky adventurers won't have stolen it because they tripped the trigger and they didn't get to the shut-off switch. It could be that you've started some sort of magical engine that is going to do something bad. Maybe it's going to teleport the dungeon somewhere else. So the players may succeed in finishing the dungeon, but when they come out those front doors, maybe they're not where they left, where they were when they started. Maybe it opens a portal to hell. Maybe it sets off a massive spell throughout the entire dungeon. Maybe it's a time stop spell. And suddenly your players have to deal with the fact that some of them, or even all of them, may have been time stopped. Now you may be rolling your eyes going, well, that's no fun because now they're frozen in time. Don't make it permanent. Make it last long enough for an effect to happen. Maybe the time stop is just long enough for the owners of the dungeon to get there and to capture them, put them in a cell, and your next session begins with you wake up in a cell. And then the next step for the dungeon or the adventure continues from there. But it started by a click and a whir and then a die on the table. That may not be a die 12. Maybe it's only a die 4. A good thing with alarms, you want to get the players worrying. If they have an audible alarm, put a die 4 down there. It's at 4. You know, every turn that goes by, or every round, or every minute that goes by of game time, that goes down by 1. If you really want to add some tension to it, put an egg timer out there. Every time that egg timer drops down, you know, it needs to be reset, you lower your die by 1. That way the players can see visibly the sands of time ticking away, and then they can see that counter. It also gives them an actual visual representation of how much time they're using, how well they're using the time, and how much they might be wasting their time towards God knows what that's going to happen. But again, you've got a layer. Whether that layer is physical layers in actual 1-2 punches for traps, layers in the trap goes off, it creates an immediate effect and then a later effect, like the payoff with the pheromones. Whether it's a story element where the trap goes off and then it sets some sort of doubt or interplay in motion with the adventurers. It doesn't matter. You're layering your trap. Your trap isn't just a flat item. It didn't just go off, have its effect, and it's forgotten with a grumbly player who's now down 2 die 6. And with 5th edition being what it is, he's going to be down 2 die 6. The cleric's going to do is going to do a healing spell on him. He's going to be okay. They're going to fight some more. They might take a short rest, and then the cleric will get, you know, something back again, or whatever, or they got healing potions. The point being is that traps can be effective in that, but they have to be layered with other stuff. Other traps, encounters, a later payoff, and sometimes just putting doubt or fear in the minds of the players, and by fear I don't mean actual fear, but, you know, the fear of what might happen to their characters into their minds is all that you need. So, hopefully this will help you out with bringing traps back into the dungeon where they belong. Let's make traps great again. And, you know, get them going back into your dungeons, but make them show up in an interesting way. Make it where they count for something, that they improve the game, that they are fun, they're memorable, that your players will be talking about them. If you have favorite traps, go ahead and talk about them below. If you've had some really great successes in layering your traps in whatever way it may be, go ahead and share them. I'm sure other people would like to hear them. Like, share, and subscribe. You can chat me up over on Twitter on as Elfbait. You can email me at baittheelf@gmail.com. And there's the Elfbait Facebook group. Links are going to be down below to all of those, so feel free to check us out and get out and game.